Hi guys, this is Krista from Mosaic Party and Event Design with some blooms by Mosaic. Today's project is going to be how to make rose leaves out of coffee filters. This is part of a series that I have that will be uploaded shortly to make these red rose coffee filters. But today we're going to focus on how to make the greens in the leaves and the calyx for the rose construction later on. So let's get started. You will need cone-shaped coffee filters. If you can't find these in your area, you should be able to order them online, but they're pretty common, at least in North America. I know some parts of Europe they're a little harder to find. I get these at the dollar store. You will need some scissors. A pencil will come in handy. Some floral tape. Some crafting wire. I'm using a 26 gauge bow tying wire. Again, I get this at my local dollar store. You will need some tacky glue. You will also need some food coloring. I'm working with Wilton icing colors. These are gel food colorings, and I've got a moss green and a juniper green. You will need a foam paintbrush, a little cup to put your food coloring in. I've already got started here. You will also need a little bit of water to thin it down. And you will also need some conditioner for your color, for your paint. And I know you're looking at glue and wondering why I'm calling it conditioner. So I'm using Elmer's Glue All. You can also use a construction PVA glue. It works as an extender or paint conditioner for paints and water-based products. You can also use a product called Flood Floetrol. And I'll talk about what this does with the paint and why I'm adding it in. This is a new step that I've started doing. So if you've seen some of my earlier videos, I don't do this. I'll talk more about this, but you will need some other glue. You can use Mod Podge or tacky glue as well. I'm just trying to use this up. So let's get started. First and foremost, we will need to cut our leaf shapes out of coffee filters. To do one rose, you will need one coffee filter for the calyx, and you will only need one coffee filter for the leaves. 2 in total. Easy as that. So let's do the leaves first. These coffee filters have this sort of crimped edge. You're going to fold your coffee filter in half right to just before that edge. And then you're going to fold it in half to the same spot. And what we're going to do is cut out half a teardrop shape. Our goal is to get something like that, so we're going to create half of that. This is actually going to be the bottom of your leaf and the top of your leaf, just because of the surface area that we have to work with here. So just to show you, we're cutting out that general shape. You don't need to use a pencil. Honestly, just cut it out. They're always all going to be a little bit different from one flower to the next, and I really encourage that. It's more organic and more lifelike when they're not templated to perfection. All right, so you're just going to cut that out, and you will have a result of 2 sets of leaves. There are 4 pieces here. Because we folded the coffee filter in half and then in half again, and there's 2 pieces in the coffee filter. So we have 4 leaves, but we're going to glue 2 together later on so that you'll have 2. So we now need to make the calyx. So I found the best way to do this is to cut a circle out of your coffee filter. I'm just going to use a glass mug I have here because it's the right size. it's about 3 inches, 3¼ inches, I believe. You could go a little bit bigger. I wouldn't go much smaller than a 3-inch diameter, just because the calyx will be too small. So what we're trying to do is create a shape like this. And it's just easier to do that if you start with a circle. So cut that out. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be folding and cutting away a lot of the circle. You just want the general shape. There is a way of folding the coffee filter to get the same effect without having to cut out the circle first, but it gets a little confusing for some reason in my brain as with the shape of the coffee filter. You'll have two. You really only just need one, so set one aside for another project or another time that you need to make calyx and forgot to cut one out. And what we're going to do from here is fold this in half. So in half, and then we're going to fold it into one, like a thirds. So I usually just find the center point at the bottom with my finger and hold it, and then fold this up. And I kind of eyeball it. I don't really press the seam too tight just yet because I want to make sure that this side matches up, and it doesn't. So I just get it to match up as best as possible. And you have this cone shape. I'll open it up so you can see that in quicker motion. You can kind of see it's all sectioned off like pie. Fold it in half, 1/3, and then the other third. So what we're going to do here, and just to show you, is we're going to be cutting out little narrow leaves. You don't have to draw it out first. You can just go ahead and cut. But we're not going to be cutting away any of this folded seam here. We are going to be cutting off the tip, however. I'll show you that last bit. Cut this out. And leave some of that folded edge there. And then cut off the bottom tip, not too much, just a little bit. And when you open it up, you have your calyx. And that's actually a good size for the hole. It'll fit right over your stem later and work into your rows. This one I'll probably have to cut or trim a little bit when I'm working with it. Okay, so how do we color these? That's the big thing. I know a lot of you have had problems coloring your coffee filters before, and some of you have reached out to me on Facebook or Instagram, and even here on YouTube. And I have a couple of new tips and tricks. I have posted videos before, but I have some new tips and tricks that I'm going to be including in this video that I've started adapting for myself. What I'm going to do is just grab another sheet of wax paper. So I'm working with wax paper or parchment paper. It's really the best material for allowing your pieces to dry. So as your paint is drying, you want to lay your pieces flat on wax or parchment paper, and you'll get the best coloring effect in the end. So some of the problems that some of you have mentioned to me is that your color fades and it's way too light, or you get blotching or splotches. And so I'm going to talk a little bit why that happens. Part of it is how you lay it out to dry, which is why I use this as a surface to lay it out to dry. It doesn't tend to blotch and muddle your color. Additionally, it's how you apply your paint. So that's why we're using a foam paintbrush. And lastly, the new trick I'm using when I'm doing food coloring is I'm adding an extender to my paint. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. So in here I have mostly moss green and just a little bit of juniper green. So if we're going to talk about quantities or ratios, you want, for every teaspoon of food coloring, and I mean true measurement of teaspoon, not like a heaping teaspoon of sugar that you would put in coffee or something like that. For every teaspoon of food coloring that you have, you want to use about 3/4 of a teaspoon of glue or flood Floetrol. And what that does, I think I've got a jam up here. Yeah, it's clogged. What that does is it extends your paint. So what do I mean by that? It adds more coverage without adding more color. So using less of this, but it gives us more surface coverage. It won't take away the pigmentation of your paint. Unlike diluting it with too much water, when you thin down with water only, it starts breaking out the pigmentation of your color. And that's why a lot of you, when this dries, are finding they dry really light because of the fibrous quality of coffee filters. There's not a lot of bonding for the pigmentation of color to adhere to in here. So we're adding the glue to help with the pigmentation and the leveling out of color. It's kind of going to give it a Mod Podged effect, almost like you colored it then Mod Podged it. And it's going to help that color lock in and stay and not dry out. So I've just added a little bit of that in there. I'm just stirring it up, and I'm going to thin it down with some water. At this point, you want to get your color base done first, but then thin it out with water. And the goal is to have something very watery. It should just kind of drip off of your brush or stir stick, whatever you're using. And you want it to just saturate and flood right through your coffee filter. So, and I have a hair. Okay. So I use a foam brush, and our reasoning here is because this controls how much goes in here. So that's also another reason why some of you are finding that it blotches or bleeds your color as it dries, is there's too much moisture in it. So the foam brush, you can see I've already been painting. That's why I grabbed this piece of parchment before, or wax paper. The foam brush helps you push the color in and pull the excess out. And I'm actually just using the side of my foam brush to do that. And you don't want to leave it where you painted. I used to lay out all my leaves and then paint them and just leave them in the spot, but I found I would get little tiny blotches and stuff I didn't quite like. It's because of the moisture left on your wax paper will kind of find its way and suck back up into that porous paper. So you want to lift and move it to a clean piece of wax paper or parchment paper. But first, double check your other side. Make sure that paint is all the way through, and then set it aside to dry. Now, the glue in here is going to help this dry much quicker. I used to say leave it for about 8 hours. You'll probably find in about 3 hours you can use these. Don't worry about picking up paint like this from what you've been working on before. You're just going to brush it out anyways. If you've used too much glue, let's talk about that for a minute. If you found you've used too much glue, you will know right away. Your color will not spread through the paper, and it will kind of almost like there's crayon or waxiness in there, and it's just kind of refusing to spread into the paper easily. All you have to do is go back and add just a tiny little bit more food coloring and a little more water to thin it out. The water is really what gives you the ability to spread it through the paper. The glue is what's helping bond the color into it. I don't know the science behind it, but that's the general gist. Okay. When it goes right through like that, you'll find that you have the perfect ratio. I did make these particular leaves a little darker, and that's just achieved with a little more food coloring. Oops, a little fuzzball fell in there. A little more food coloring. Also the colors that you used. I think I added a little more of the juniper green, versus the moss green, but you can use any green. You can blend them out how you want. I'm just pulling the excess out there because I can see this one's too saturated. Also, the more of the moisture you pull out, the quicker it'll dry. Another reason for using the wax paper too is so that it dries evenly, but also because we have the glue in there, it will have a little tackiness to it. So as these dry, they will stick to the wax paper, but they'll peel right off. All right, and I'm just getting off the excess. I realized I have too much on my brush. Now I'm just gonna get the calyx here. Okay. And it's as easy as that. So I'm going to let these set to dry. I've already got some done, so we can move on to the next step. And I'm going to talk about these ones for a moment because I don't know if the camera is going to pick this up. So let's just try and get closer to the camera and see. You can see the color is not as perfectly even. I have little spots that are lighter than the rest, and I'll talk about why that happened. I'm not going to mind too much because by the time I texture these and get them on my rose, it's not going to show. However, the reason that happened was because I got a little anxious to do the video and wanted to get it done while I still had some daylight here. And when these were partially dry, I popped them into the microwave. Now, this is a really good trick if you are in a pinch, but I don't recommend it. So you can pop these in the microwave. I would let them dry for about an hour at least if you do this. And all you have to do is lay them flat on the glass plate in your microwave. Make sure that that's nice and clean and dry. You don't want any extra moisture in there. And put them in for about 9-second intervals and then flip them over and do 9 seconds on the other side. And that'll give you a drier paper to work with sooner than waiting the 4 hours or more for your wet pieces to dry. This splotching happened because I didn't wait long enough for the moisture to get out. They were still too damp, and when they go in the microwave and you add heat, it adds steam, and it's the steam and moisture that starts blotching everything and making your colors bleed. So if you can, just let them room temperature dry on a sheet, on a piece of wax paper or parchment paper, and you'll be good. Okay. So I'm just going to clean off my paintbrush because I'm going to need it for my next step. What we want to do is create this beautiful texturing in these leaves and get these glued together. So you will need 2 of those 26 gauge wires. You will need some glue. I'm going to use Elena's glue at this point. I just find the tackiness, it dries just a little tiny bit quicker than the PVA or glue all. Even though that's a fast drying formula, Elena's is even more so. And usually I have my glue sitting upside down in a cup so that it's ready to pour, but I didn't do my own trick this time around, and I've got air bubbles in it. Okay, so we're going to take our leaves when they're dry, and I'm going to take a little damp paintbrush. It just helps move the glue a little bit better. I'm going to pick up glue and I'm going to glue an entire side, right from top to bottom and edge to edge. I find a flat, stiffer paintbrush is better for this. This is the one I had handy. Okay. So you're going to give complete coverage. And then you're going to put your wire in almost near the top, all the way down to the center bottom. And you're going to press that in. Try not to wipe your glue away. really press that in. You want it to be anchored in there and not slip out later. You're going to take your other piece and line it up as best you can. Doesn't have to be perfect. And burnish in that wire. Use your nail if you have to, or the edge of the edge of your paintbrush. It gives you that center vein, and it also makes sure it's anchored in there. And then pick it up and just press your seams together and make sure they're all closed. If they don't line up like this one does, I don't know if you can see that, but they're not lining up, and that's okay because we're going to trim that off when they're dry. If you try and do it now, it's going to muck it up because it's all tacky and wet. You do want to just pinch the bottom like that and create almost like a cupping. You can see I've pinched it to the wire. And do this now while the glue is activating, and that'll help give you a little catch point for your floral tape later. A little brush hair from my paintbrush. Okay, so we're going to quickly do the other one. I'm going to just wet my paintbrush a little bit. Again, you don't want to add water right to your glue. It just thins it down too much and it won't be as sticky as you need it to be. But just a little tiny bit of water in your paintbrush will help spread it easier, especially if it's been on your dish for a little bit because it's starting to set up and gets thick and clumpy. Okay, take your wire, center from the top down to the bottom, press it in. Lay your piece on top, match it up as best you can, press and burnish in all the edges. I'm just using the edge of my paintbrush. You can also use your scissors, but it could tear it because it is wet. You could use your nails if you have nails, but my hands are a mess because I've been working a lot with paint lately. No nails. Lift it off your surface and then just press all your seams together. And again, clean up your edges when it's dry, but I'm going to show you how to get all that texturing in there, and we're going to do that while they're wet. So, set your calyx aside for when you build your roses. Oh, I forgot to pinch the bottom. Don't forget to pinch the bottom. Twist it if you need to. Get that guy stuck to your wire as best you can, and it creates the leaf shape cupping a bit too, which is nice. Okay, so while they're still wet with the glue, while the glue's in there and you have the thickness of that and your layers, and it can be molded. I was going to say it's moldability. I can't speak. Anyways, you're going to fold it in half. It also gives you an opportunity to kind of press the wire in a little bit more. And you're going to fold it in half, and then we're going to accordion fold it back and forth, where you would imagine vein lines. Like normally you would burnish those in or create those or mold them in with a mold. We're actually going to do it with folding and twisting. So from that point at close to the bottom to about here, and then up here to here, here to here, and so forth. So you'll see as we go. I'm going to fold it and press. You can see. So what I've done is created a press, a fold, and then I'm going to flip it over and fold, and flip it over and fold. And you're just going to accordion it back and forth, moving up the wire until you have something like that. And I hope you can see that okay. Super fun. Easy to do. Just fold it like that. Press in those seams that the folded areas. Press them in. You want them kind of to score the paper. And then you're going to twist it. So you're going to twist it where the folds are. You're going to twist it that way, around the wire and around itself. You are not going to ruin it. I promise you. And you are going to be able to open it up. But what I wouldn't do, don't leave it like this. Unroll it right away. You don't want that glue to start setting. because then you will tear it and you will ruin it. But if you do it right away, you won't. Open it up, be gentle, try not to shift your wire too much. I did roll a little too tight and I warbled my wire. You want your wire to stay straight, but don't worry about it if it does bend. Open it up, and voila, you have a leaf. So we're going to do the other one. The beautiful thing about adding that glue as a paint conditioner or extender into your color mix is it gives it almost a leathery Mod Podge effect without actually having to go back in and Mod Podge it, which can make it stiff. You'll still want to go in with UV spray if you want to help protect it from light and moisture later on. But this is kind of like skipping a Mod Podge step, which a lot of you do after the fact out there. And it gives it the texture, especially for leaves. It's just wonderful for leaves. It gives it a lifelike texture. Open it up, and there you go. And you can go back in, and if you want to kind of really anchor some more sort of noticeable veins, you can go in and do that. And you're going to let those dry. And when they're dry is when you're going to add, I'm just catching that a little bit onto the wire there. When they're dry is when you can clean up the edges, and we're going to finish the edges with that little spiky detail that rose leaves have. But wait till they're dry also to put the floral tape on. But what you're going to do is floral tape them together, and then you're going to add them to your rose when we get to the rose making video. So I have a set here. These ones I did a little bit lighter in color. These ones I did darker because I found that these were a little too light, and I'm actually probably going to go in and color them with some powdered food coloring a little bit later, just to deepen the color. But rose leaves should have this spiky kind of edge. I don't know if you can see that in this light, or how well it did spike. I don't think it's showing. You'll sort of get the gist, but we're going to create those little spikiness. If you just want regular leaves, you could just leave them like that. But what we're going to do to create that little spike is you're just going to take your scissors and barely, right at the back interior edge, you're going to barely cut. You're not even really going to cut. You're going to use the scissors as a razor and pull out. And you're just going to work your way down or your way up. You can start from the bottom. And you're actually just kind of cutting and pulling, and you're pulling the leaf away and the scissors away. Be careful. And it just creates that sort of edge that rose leaves have. I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. I'm going to talk about that leaf in a minute because it's not really the prettiest leaf. You want to wait till it's dry to do this step. If you try and do it when they're wet like this, you're just going to tear the paper and pull your leaves apart. Okay. So this leaf, unfortunately, I left at the twisted stage. I left it twisted just a little too long while I worked on something else, and I had trouble opening it. My glue started setting and it's a little too crinkled. And again, the camera may not be picking it up, but in comparison to this one, you could probably tell it's a lot more wrinkled and crinkled. And that's okay, but I don't really like it. So just make sure that you, after you've twisted them, that you unfold them right away and then let them set. All right, and I would wait till they're dry, but you're going to come in and floral tape them. I like to make sure my edge of my floral tape is straight. You're going to floral tape them together. If you want this stem a little thicker, then you may want to just add another little piece of wire in there, or go over it with floral tape a couple of times. But most of this stem is going to be covered up by adding it to your rose stem anyways. It's only going to be just the little bit that shows. If you want to add just these into floral arrangements, they're wonderful because they're bendable because of that wire in there. Even when they're dry, they're completely bendable, shapeable, however you want. And that is how you make a rose leaf. So you could just make a bunch of leaves like this and make a branch, or you could have them as extras for your arrangements on a longer stem. They're perfect. I look forward to showing you guys how to color the petals and cut the petals and make the rose next. Happy crafting, everyone. Be sure to comment and let me know if you do try this technique and the glue, and let me know what your experience with it is. You can feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook. I will put the links to my social media in the description of this video. Like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.